One of the most fundamental aspects of us being humans is our ability to reason. Now, reasoning is really important in life, but it's much more important also in writing. It's important in writing because of two things. First, in writing, the writer speaks directly to the reader, but the reader cannot actually respond back to the writer and ask him, what do you mean by this type of logical reasoning? And so the writer should be very, very keen on how to reason well in his writing. Second, writing is structured, is formal, and therefore it should have taken a lot of thinking on the part of the writer. And therefore, one of the essential parts of persuasive writing is the ability to reason. In this lesson, we're going to learn one aspect of reasoning and how to avoid one logical fallacy. So reasoning is important, and how to avoid logical fallacy. Actually, logical fallacies are a lot. This is an error in logic or error in the reasoning. There are many of them, but in this lesson we're going to talk about only one logical fallacy that is very pertinent, very important in persuasive writing because it pertains to generalization. One of the formal definitions of reasoning is that it refers to the process of making sense of things around us. So it's actually a process. It's not an event, but it's a process, a thinking process that entails your senses and then how you can make sense out of things around you in the environment and wherever it's around you. In order to understand our experiences, first of all, to understand them and draw conclusions from these information that are around us, especially nowadays in the 21st century where the bombardment of a lot of information around us, and present new ideas, we must use reasoning. So reasoning is a product of understanding first, and then drawing conclusions, and then coming up with new ideas. And therefore, this is a process of reasoning. Without reasoning, you'll not be able to actually draw any conclusions nor present new ideas regarding that. One of the most important aspects of reasoning is the idea of generalization. Generalization is a reasoning skill that helps you develop a strong thesis statement, and this is why it's important for persuasive writing. Now remember, when you want to persuade, you need to have a strong thesis statement. And this thesis statement usually comes after you collect information, not before that. Of course, you might have a hypothesis when you start writing persuasive writing, but first, when you collect information and then make sense out of them using reasoning skills, you will have a strong thesis statement. And that's only done when you're able to reason. And this reasoning skill is called generalization. It occurs when you state a rule or a principle based on fact and experience. So it's a rule or principle based on fact and experience, both of them, not only facts. Because you need to combine your personal experience and the facts that you collect together to have a rule or principle. In sciences, you call these hypotheses. Now, it's very important to understand that generalization don't always work in terms of fact and experience. And there's no telling whether it's 100% satisfied or not. We're going to talk about that in a different lesson, that in generalization, you can never 100% say that this is the rule that applies to everything, specifically in social sciences. In the physical sciences, yes, it is true that you might have a generalization of 100%, but specifically in social sciences, it's very hard to prove that. Sometimes people say it's impossible to prove that. But anyway, generalization is very important. And people who usually use generalization are scientists. So let's take this example. Suppose you have visited Alexandria 3 times in July and August, and each time the weather was hot and muggy. From these experiences, you could generalize that Alexandria is hot and muggy in the summer. So this is an example of generalization. If you look at the last sentence, that's a rule or a principle. That's a generalization here. Right? So it's based on facts and experience. First, you went there 3 times. That's enough times, and that's during July and August. That's during the summer. And each time the weather was hot and muggy. Okay? Therefore, based on experience and the facts you have, you can conclude that Alexandria is hot and muggy in the summer. And notice that this one is more general than the first one. So if I want to use that in reasoning, I can use it in such a case. I can use this one. That's the conclusion, which is in this case Alexandria is hot and muggy in the summer. And I use these 3 dots to signify that this is a conclusion. In other words, some call this therefore or hence. Okay, so therefore is a conclusion. Alexandria is hot and muggy in the summer. So the first one is that the first premise is that I visited Alexandria 3 times in July and August. So I visited Alexandria 3 times in July and August. Number 2, which is stated in the passage above, is that each time the weather was hot and muggy. Okay? So we have 2 premises. We call these premise 1 and this is premise 2, and that's the conclusion. Based on these 2 premises, you have this particular conclusion. Now there's one thing which is not stated, which is called the warrant. Without that, it's not possible to have this conclusion. The third one, which is called the warrant, and which links the conclusion with the premises, is that 3, I'm going to call this a warrant, is that July and August are month in the summer, or what we call the summer month. Because unless July and August are summer month, the whole conclusion is fallacious. Alright? So we need to have this warrant there. Now, of course, this is not stated because the writer assumes that everyone knows that July and August are during the summer. But if I assume that July and August are not during the summer, then the whole conclusion is false. And that's an example of generalization. And notice the generalization uses data or words from the first premise and words from the second premise. Okay? Words from the first premise and words from the second premise. In the first premise we have, I visited Alexandria 3 times in July and August. This is Alexandria. This is from premise 1. In the second one, each time the weather is hot and muggy. This is from premise 2. Okay? And then I use July and August to have a generalization that it's during the summer. If I do not include during the summer here, if I said conclusion, Alexandria is hot and muggy full stop, this means it's always hot and muggy throughout the whole year. In this case, I'm committing a fallacy. And we call this a fallacy, an error in reasoning. Why? Because this is not generalization, because the evidence that you have is not sufficient to have this conclusion. If the evidence that you have is not sufficient for this conclusion, we call this hasty generalization. So what is hasty generalization? It's a broad generalization based on insufficient evidence. Like the example you had there, if I delete during the summer, Alexandria is hot and muggy, without during the summer, then it's insufficient evidence, because I've only experienced Alexandria during the summer, which are August and July. If I had experienced Alexandria throughout the whole year and more than once, then I won't commit hasty generalization. So hasty generalization is a logical fallacy. It's very striking that a logical fallacy happens every single day of your life, and most people are not aware that they're committing hasty generalization, because they always generalize based on insufficient evidence, and this is something they have to take into account, and specifically in writing. And one more thing about hasty generalization is that it's very hard to pinpoint. Sometimes you would think it's hasty generalization, but it's not. However, it's very sufficient in writing to understand it and to be on guard against hasty generalization. So let's look at these two examples. All professional athletes are healthy, and television shows are too violent. Notice in the first and the second one. The first one, I'm using the word all, which means in this case, mathematically speaking, it's 100%. With no exclusion, that they are all healthy. Now, the first thing is that this is insufficient evidence. How do you know that all professional athletes are healthy? It's not possible that you know all studies and reports of all possible professional athletes that are healthy. So this is the first one. So then in this case, we call this hasty generalization. Second one, television shows are too violent. So it seems that without saying all television shows, you are indicating that as well. Okay? So in this case, you don't have also sufficient evidence to prove that all television shows are too violent. Again, this is called hasty generalization. To fix the hasty generalization, we have to have a sound generalization. One thing to fix in the hasty generalization is that you have to fix the qualifiers. Qualifiers are words that signify the degree of generalization that you have. Such qualifiers can be some, many, most, and all. Now, all is very hard to defend, because if I find only one case which is not following your rule, then your conclusion is wrong. In this case, it's a hasty generalization, or does not apply to all these situations. A better way for you to do it is that you have to use some, many, or most. By using these qualifiers, it's very easy for you to defend your position. So let's look at an example of how to fix the hasty. In the case of professional athletes that are healthy, we use before the hasty generalization, all professional athletes are healthy. In this case, to fix it, we have to say most professional athletes are healthy. And it's easy to actually prove it using evidence, facts, and even your experience if you can. In the second example is that we can say many people say that they find today's television shows too violent. Notice that I'm not saying that, I'm saying that many people say that. Notice that I'm just using the gradualism of generalization. Many people say they find. So, two things here. In the hasty generalization, I presented the principle as if it's a fact, it's a principle. In this case, I'm saying that many people and say they find this is the perception. It doesn't mean that it's true. It means that this is the attitude towards today's television shows too violent. So here in this case I'm using two qualifiers. I'm getting down today's television shows too violent to many, and I'm saying that people say that, which is their perception and not true. It might be true, it might be not. It's how people see television shows. And so it's very easy for you to defend it and even find evidence to support that or deny that. So it's very important to understand how to analyze based on facts and your experience, and how to avoid a logical fallacy, what we call hasty generalization, by number one, using right premises for the conclusion, and number two, to have qualifiers. In this case you can use most, many, and then of course you can use perception of people or attitude of people towards something.